Now I'm going to talk about water infrastructure, specifically US water and wastewater infrastructure. Jonathan asked, do you have any recommended books? So Edward, on your nightstand, do you have any recommended books discussing the history and policy on US water and wastewater infrastructure? And he wants to learn more about this policy area for work. And I do want to mention also that Chuck, in a podcast recently, and I'll link to it in a moment here, did actually spend quite a bit of time on wastewater and sewage and all of the like really, really challenging things that are in at stake when it comes to this. But Edward, in your work leading cities and helping them to adapt and develop, what are some of the things that you would recommend for him to help him on that policy side, and maybe some first principles to keep in mind too?
Yeah, they're all really expensive.
Yes.
That's where I would start. They're all very, very expensive. They also, all of these utilities are regulated through mandates and controls way outside of City Hall. Um, I was at a city that we worked very hard to shed off our city-run utilities to consolidate it with somebody else. Because not only is it we talk a lot about the liability, how much would it cost to repair the pipe?
Mhm.
Uh, that is like the cheapest part of your system. The operations of a utility system are really, really expensive, and we can see that in the budgets. Um, as I've talked to cities, Norman, Oklahoma is one that I'm going to call out on this because Norman, Oklahoma is somewhat handicapped and handcuffed in how they can monitor their system. To raise water and sewer rates for their utility, they have to go out for a referendum of a vote. Now, only half of their city is on public utilities. So it has become this anti-growth position. If there's water and sewer, we're going to see growth. So if half of your community is rural and doesn't want to see growth, it's a very hard thing. But these utilities cost money to operate. So I would look at that. The other thing, there is a really good book I was introduced to, and this comes out of um, Australia. I'm going to find the reference to it. There is a manual that can help tell you what some of these costs are for this. And I had it right. It is called the International Infrastructure Manual. So if you want to get really geeky in the technical side, if you want to know what it takes, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. You know what it takes to operate and control these systems. This comes out of Australia, of all places. Uh, but this book, this is the manual to kind of go into. Um, Chuck's talked a lot about utilities. Listen to um, the podcast from Mommy. That's where they have a combined water and sewer system. So the we used to go and combine our stormwater and our sewer systems together. As we did that, so like the downspouts on your house, the sub pump in your basement, that would go into the same line as your sewer. Now, what happens in a rainstorm and you have a huge flux of water into the system, it overruns the plants and it leads to spill out and contaminates that. So separating those two systems out because the black sewage, the raw sewage from a toilet is much different than rainwater off a roof. So they're trying to separate those. Uh, Early in Strongtown's days, I know Brainerd. Chuck talked a lot about Brainerd and their water system. Our water system in the US is very expensive because we use potable water to fight fires. So if we talk to incremental developers, they first realized this problem because a tap fee for a sprinkler system for a 4 unit building is the same as a tap fee for capacity as putting the toilets. And those systems have to be separate in many regulations, so we add a lot of expense to it. I think Chuck had written before, thinking through this process of we only need one size pipe for drinking water and for showers and things in our home. We need a much bigger pipe that's needed for fighting fires, for the fire hydrants, and trying to separate those two systems out. potable water gets fully treated and all, all the things they do so it's safe to drink. Fighting fire is water that does not have to go through that. So, yeah, I this is highly technical stuff. Look at the manual I dropped in the chat. If there's specific things you're looking at within the system, we've also written in Lafayette, Louisiana, the struggle with their utility system is that the edge, the new development with all the new pipes, feed through the city through all the old pipes. So kind of figuring out how the things go. So in a center of town, if that pump station would go out, it doesn't just hurt the center of town, it actually hurts all the new subdivisions. But it's 12 miles down the pipeline, so you wouldn't recognize that that was part of your neighborhood. Yeah, and I see the operating the system. Um, I can tell you somebody that was in a city that had a sewer system. When a sewer line backs up, it's going to back up on Christmas Eve at midnight, and it's going to result in raw sewage in somebody's basement. Like this is what happens. And having the technical folks on staff to do that, it's a lot. It's a lot of requirement and trying to think of that at scale in a city. And then when you do that, there's like that's a liability your city has because you've got to clean that up. Uh, when we look at the budgets, when we looked at Norman's budget, again in their budget documents for their water and sewer, they said they were funding their system. I have not found a utility system as we've looked through budgets that is adequately funded. Now, I'm not sure we're all willing to pay the rate that we need to, but when you think about a water and sewer line that is when put in the ground a generation before us, and now it breaks and we have a year to find the funding or a few weeks to find the funding for another 80 to 90-year investment, these are the things that really can turn a city upside down.
And maybe I'll add as well, the challenge that we face in our area is that there's a perception that the ditch is a bygone era, a relic of a bygone era, and that if everything is piped, and yet the holding capacity of the modest ditch, even if it starts to like gradually overflow onto the street, is massive in comparison with the simple stated capacity of a pipe that can never exceed it, or else you get into all sorts of backups and things like that. I want to find the proper article for the stormwater use in Celebration, but that's another example of really beginning to re-engage with nature. There's a lot of health benefits of that, but there's actually crucially a major reason why it needs to be done from the perspective of the infrastructure costs for a community. I would also plug street trees as a vital part of battling stormwater retention. Urban 3 has a great image of street trees where they've got basically it's a branches with a sponge up top and a sponge below. And they're like, how many of these sponges do you currently have as part of your system, as like integral parts of your system? And the idea is to get people to really realize, why is it so necessary for us to use natural means to actually capture rainwater, hold it, even if it has to hold it just for a while. It's amazing. And so seeing that image just really locked that in for me. And I think that's another area that we can touch on. Jake was asked to sit on the strategic budget committee. He said our city is switching to a priority-based budget